So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And today I'm having a guest, and I'm really happy to welcome Dean Kenny. So, little spoiler alert, we are going to talk about certain aspect that I personally believe many Scrum teams will benefit from. But before we jump into the details, Dean, would you be so kind and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dean. I'm a senior product manager here at Tidio. I've a couple of years experience in product. Actually initially started off in customer support for a couple of years and then transitioned into a product solutions manager role first, which I think it was just a role created within my first company, which was Zendesk, to really help navigate the waters between go-to-market, product, customer support, success, etc. So kind of fit my own way into product there without managing a team specifically, but more so focusing on that. And then from there, transitioned into product manager, where I did focus a lot on both product discovery as well as product delivery. Moved on to Typeform as a product manager, and then now here I am as senior product manager for the email marketing team here at Tidio.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So seems that you are the right person for us today to talk about products, to talk about product discovery. So maybe let's start with the very first question. So what are the things that you are the most proud of in your product management work?
I think it's interesting because I've had experience that I'd say I put my experience into three different buckets, like with Zendesk, Typeform, and here at Tidio, and I think they've all been so different. But I'd say the one thing that kind of sticks out was my so far was my last experience at Typeform, because I felt like, well, first, for a bit of context, I was the product manager for churn. So we were managing a churn team with the business goal of driving down churn while keeping customer sentiments, customer happiness, NPS, etc., at stable lengths. So that just was a very long period of just multiple experimentation across the board to see what could work, to find that balance of what we called like the yin and the yang of churn, keeping customers happy while driving business goals and reducing churn. And I think there was a lot to do with about all these rigorous experiments we had to do to try and generate some data. Because it's notoriously quite difficult to get hold of customers who have already churned or we think will churn. And that generated a lot of insights that led us to build what we called a data access plan on Typeform. And I was quite proud of this because all the data that we did generate over time really led us to that conclusion where we knew it would work for the business, but also could work for the customer. And what that allowed it to do was it would allow the customer to churn without any major impact on their account. Where if they did churn, they wouldn't have access to certain data, but they could go on a much lower tier plan, keep access to their data while they're in between projects without having to pay for the full tier license. So that finally was actually that middle point for the customer and for the business, and that ended up reducing churn while keeping customers happy, which was something that we just always struggled with. So after months of working with various different teams to try and drive this home and get alignment across the company, when that went on and we seen the numbers go up and to the right, I think it was something I was pretty proud of, because it felt like you were going around in circles for quite a long time trying to get it right. And then when it actually works, it feels amazing to see it, because I think in product, sometimes it's quite hard to stick around for a long period of time to see your results through like the fruits of your labor. Because in Zendesk, I was there for years, but so many projects got delayed that you don't really get to see the outcome sometimes. So for me, that's definitely the one that stands out the most.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, I fully agree that the delay that we observe in many products might be frustrating, and this ability to see the actual outcome, have this ability to really cheer with your team, to be proud of this moment of proud, right? So this is something super important, right? Because it's
Yeah.
also, I believe it's also great for your team to feel that they did something that matters.
I think so too. And it's something that it was my first time really experiencing because so many different projects have been juggled around, like I mentioned. But it's a piece of advice that I would definitely give to somebody who is working on something, a problem, like a meaty problem that doesn't always have a clear solution, is to really try and stay in a certain role, team, or company until you see that outcome, because that's where all the learnings are, right? Because up until a certain point in that team, we just kept experimenting, and some were working, some weren't. And then some of those experiments, mainly A/B tests, were like contradicting with previous stuff that we had learned, and it was just a hot mess. So you can imagine if a new opportunity came along for me or one of my team members and you leave, like, what are the learnings? There's no real learnings. It just looked like you went around in circles, right? So if knowing what type of project that you're working on or what you're trying to discover, what's the problem you're trying to solve, getting to that point where you really feel like you get value for the customer or for the business is crucial, because not only can you improve your CV, but you can have a fundamental understanding of discovery, delivery, success, and then keeping that loop going for the customer and for the business. So I'd say that's critical for sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I feel that we've already started to tackle a lot of product discovery topics. So maybe some of people who are listening to us, they do not know what is product discovery. So could you help us to tell a story, to tell a metaphor? How would you explain what product discovery is to someone who is new, who does not have much knowledge in that area?
I think for me it's actually not a super clear definition answer, but if I was to kind of boil it down, I think it would be everything outside of delivery within a product. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
probably an oversimplification for sure, because delivery is such a massive area of focus that certainly wouldn't be my area of expertise, but everything that comes before that I think would be. And the way I like to think about it is that with all these new companies that I've joined many different teams, and
Mm-hmm.
actually apart from Tidio where I'm at now, the onboarding has been pretty average. It's a bit more rough and ready, and here, read this, read that, now try this. So I try to boil everything down into a framework that I can my own framework that I can loosely work off whenever I start something new. So I think the best way to think about it is like everything has to be surrounded by the business context first before you think of the customer. And I think that might annoy people because you see about the customer value everywhere, but really everything boils down to the business. Because if everything that you're looking at from a customer value point of view, if that's not surrounded in the context of what the business is trying to achieve, you're going to run into problems with stakeholders, or you're going to end up creating something that doesn't have any traction whatsoever, and it's just a bad area to go. So I have like a typical Miro board that I just have different pillars that I try to complete as I start a new team, or even if I'm in the middle of a new team, just trying to get some of the pieces together. So
Mm-hmm.
it's trying to understand, okay, what is the company vision? What are some of the goals, the strategies, OKRs, whatever framework the company is using, and just trying to plot them any way I can within Miro, for example, or any platform. Then you're starting to pick the pieces together, and you're like, okay, this is what the company is trying to do, and then maybe someone in the product team or somewhere, the CEO is giving you a direction, like we need to build something that generates this outcome. Maybe it's monetary, like MRR, or an activation or retention rate, and it's it's the job of someone responsible for this to really boil this down into like, okay, these are my goals, and now within that, what is the difference between where we are right now and those goals? So let's say you're at 0 MRR and you need to get to 10k MRR. What are the gaps between that in terms of where the product is now and where it could be in order to generate that revenue? So that's where I start to look at all the data that we have, right? Both the qualitative and the quantitative data. Qualitative is everything around like research, speaking to customers, ticket feedback from the customer care team. And again, I just try and plot that into categories, into buckets. Maybe just 5 people talking about performance issues, maybe just 3 people saying they're missing certain key features. And you just start to plot that, right? But ideally, you might have some quantitative data there ahead of time. And that's really looking at everything across all the customer space. You could have thousands of customers who click a certain link, or they might be doing a certain action. If you can get that first and surround that into qualitative data, you can start to paint a bit of a picture here about where you are now versus where you could be in the future. And that gives that picture of where you are now. And then for the future, then you start looking at everything that's outside of your company, right? What is the market doing now? What are competitors doing? What inspiration can you get from different verticals that are doing something similar for customer value? So that's when I start to create a product vision. And from there, you start iterating within different stakeholders. You're testing a few things out. And really that boils down, hopefully that's the answer to your question, to a set of hypotheses. So boil it down to a hypothesis statement that is testable. And the most important thing that I've learned is that the hypothesis statement is testable, as in like it's 0 or 1. Whereas like whatever experiment you have to design or to test out, it has to be one or the other. And it can't just be a multitude of reasons, because I've made that mistake in the past as well. So for me, it boils it down to those testable statements to reduce as much risk as possible. Because if I say, hey, the future for us to create a brand new product that generates triple MRR is to create this brand new app, and I just plan that and then their team delivers it, that's a super expensive risk that may not pay off because you haven't validated anything. So everything boils down to risk between the goal of where you are now and where you want to be. Boil that down to hypotheses and assumptions, find out ways to test that iteratively, and then you kind of just test your way onto commitment. And that's where you come to deliverability, because I think the most important thing to make use of everybody's time, knowledge, and expense is to give them work that you know is going to generate value for both the customer and the business, as measured by all the metrics that you have to decide for when doing this product discovery. Big long-winded answer. Hopefully that kind of answers what you were asking me.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was indeed a lot. So let me try to paraphrase that. So basically, before we are sure we have enough data information that yes, we should deliver this particular product, maybe this particular feature, we have a lot of work to do. And to simplify things, we can call this work product discovery. This process requires goals. So we have to start this conversation about the goals, about the vision. We need to understand what is our gap, and basically we are creating a lot of different hypotheses that needs to be testable. And we try to understand what is the best direction, where are the directions that we should invest more, and this whole process that is happening before we have enough confidence that yes, let's deliver fully working product or fully working feature. We might call it in short product discovery.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of tying it all together. And I think one thing to make clear is that like sometimes when you're working with a team and you realize that there's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of change and things that don't make sense one day and that don't make sense the next. I've been there. And I think if anyone's listening to this that has gone through that or is going through that, it's because one of those factors that you just mentioned that you paraphrase is missing. And I think that's super important to work up on solving those problems, because I've chatted to many people who have just this constant chaos of like management changed this one day, leadership changed this the next, and we found this bug that we didn't foresee because it wasn't spiked properly because no one really understood why we were doing this. These are all the things that problems from the very top that get trickled down and they have a domino effect. So these individual things are super important. Like, for example, you said there about like, yeah, it's obvious that you would have a goal and you try and find the gap between it. I've worked on many teams, that myself included, that is just not there. So then it's like, then you only focus on the customer problem, which is still good. And that's what you read about everywhere. Like, what customer problem are we solving here? But if you just run around solving problems, you don't really know where you're going, right? Like in this room now, there's probably about 7 or 8 different problems I could fix. But the problem is where do you prioritize from that? And that's when you keep asking the why, and then there's gaps in the information on the hierarchy. And that's why I always flip it and I say, I start here, I work down, I get my information, and then I move forward, because you'll always get caught out. Someone will always catch you out. You'll catch yourself out and you'll be like, I didn't do the work from the start. So really, that's my process from left to right. Not always perfect. There's gaps across the whole journey that I have to go back and fill in, and it's not perfect. It's an art and a science, I feel. But yeah, that's typically how I would go about it.
Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing. So basically it's a process of learning, right? And we want to make it right, to maximize the likelihood that all our efforts pay off, and we mitigate the risks in the best possible way.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, I feel you mentioned already a few different tools, practices, approaches. So on one hand, I really enjoyed you speaking about mission, goals, understanding gaps, including measurements, right measurements. So we may inspire our audience with, for instance, evidence-based management or any other frameworks that will guide you. So this is one tangible outcome for our audience. But what about other? I also heard, for instance, A/B testing. So do you have some favorite, some tools, techniques? Do you have some things that you can recommend based on your experience?
I think A/B testing is great, but I get the feeling that online, when you read about it, it feels like everything can be an A/B test, and it can be boiled down to that. And I don't think that's true. For example, right now in Tidio, we have a very specific amount of customers that we're dealing with, so you don't have enough data to really do A/B tests, and maybe that's one of the pitfalls that a lot of people make. So really, with A/B testing, some of the best tips and tricks I've learned along the way working with data analysts is just to make sure you tick the right boxes of whether this can be whether a hypothesis can be tested, proven with an A/B test or not. And I always work with a data analyst to find out, like, okay, what are some of the things that we want to test? Is there like a control and then a variant of two different things? And you think that the variant is going to outperform the control based off a certain metric, right? So then you start to have this conversation, because sometimes it's like, oh, A/B test, let's A/B test it, right? It's like, okay, but like let's talk this through. So you think that there's a current experience, maybe there's a landing page for pricing, for example, right? And then you might say, okay, we want to change it and see if it changes something. Okay, change what? What's the goal? It goes back to the goal. So let's just say you want to go from 0 to 20% uplift. Okay, now you have a good starting point. So you start to check these boxes. So you say, okay, how much traffic is on this page? Because you need to understand how many different people are going to be exposed to this control or this variant, which can determine how long this experiment can run for. So that's one thing that I've tripped up on along the way too. Sometimes I might plan a whole roadmap of experiments that are outside delivery, and I think I've like, great, I've everything done. And when it comes to executing those, I realize that there's not enough traffic, there's not enough uplift on a certain metric that I want to tie to my goals. And I realized that in order to get some significant results here, proper significant results, it would actually take me like 2 or 3 months to get it. And that was something that notoriously I had a very tough time with in Typeform, working on the churn team, because really you're trying to get less people to cancel their account each month. So as you're driving that down, it makes it a lot harder to test because you have less people. So then it's riskier because you need to test for longer periods of time for significance. So really, that's why I say it's an art or a science. One other way around that is, I've worked with data science teams in the past, which if your team has one, your company has one, it's definitely worth working with, because they were able to help design I think it's called a causal inference model, which I'm not an expert on, but it was basically the ability to take previous months of performance of whether someone clicked on a certain page or not, and being able to forecast it in the future as the controller, the variant, so that you're able then to double the amount of exposure for your total audience, and then you can get results in half the time. So there's some different techniques that can be used when you're working on a specific product or feature that doesn't have that much traffic. So basically, to summarize on that, definitely when you have a lot of traffic, you can use these techniques. But when you don't have a lot of traffic, then you have to be a bit more crafty, right? You have to figure out different ways that you can test. And maybe you can just boil that down to like a qualitative way of judging that, right? If you're just working from the ground up in a startup, for example, or a small company, you can just take different groups of customers, control, vary, and test both, and go from there, because you're not always going to have that traffic for A/B tests. I have met product managers who can get significant results in like less than a day because there's so much traffic. But for me, it's always been like 4 weeks. So again, it comes back to risk. How important is this test in order to get the results that you need to move forward? Is it worth 4 or 5 weeks of waiting? Can you do multiple tests at the same time, or do you have to wait for that one test in order to do anything? So there's a couple of different things that need to be considered for this. And it's not like a cure-all where you can just slap an A/B test and get your answers, because I also have made that mistake before of testing multiple things or multiple outcomes, as I mentioned before, and I get the results. I'm like, okay, but why did this go up or down in the variant? And you don't know why, and then the results are flawed. So yeah, there's some of the ways you can avoid those pitfalls, I guess.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very powerful statement, that there's no one tool to rule them all. And we always have to be aware what is our context, what are the risks, and simply some of the practices will not work for us. We have to look for something different. Sometimes it will be an interview, like user research with a smaller group. So maybe sometimes it's better to have a conversation with 10 customers instead of blind guessing or treating yourself as a customer. If you are really not your customer, then it might be definitely too simplified. So going back to how we can benefit from that conversation. So you mentioned the goals, vision, you mentioned different tools, techniques. So A/B test sounds like a great idea to test idea. So to test hypothesis. So now let's look at this gap. So we have clear goal, we have something that we are aiming at, and now here we are testing. So in between, how do you generate those more specific ideas, hypotheses to verify? Do you have any piece of advice in that place of this process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, because in terms of like hypothesis testing and your product vision, how do you create that product vision in the first place? And I think when you have surrounded this context, you really boil it down to some people use opportunity solution trees for like continuous discovery. I have a bit of practice in that, but I think it's something that you have to get used to. The way I've done it in the past is just boil everything down to a set of problem statements that you can then work with your team in order to brainstorm different solutions or different paths. And I think that's actually a technique, not just to try and find things to add to the backlog, but just to generate ideas. So if you do this across various different problem statements that you're seeing within your product that fit the context of the business, then you're starting to get more data. You're getting data from your own stakeholders, and you're trying to piece things together. And then it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? You don't think you necessarily have to be a Steve Jobs visionary to kind of get this, because the data is usually in your face a lot of the time. Pair that with research, pair that with quantitative data as well, and then you start to fit those things together. And then if you get your product vision from there, and there's still more things that need to be tested, more hypotheses to be made, then you just kind of lay them out again, just like you would, and you just keep refining it. And that's the thing about discovery too, is that it's continuous, constant. Like the mistake I used to make was do it before the end of each quarter, and I just like, okay, my quarterly roadmap needs to be in place, and I need to scramble because there's a lot of things I still don't know or assumptions I'm making, and I need to run for it to get research, or I need to do all this kind of stuff to plan my next quarter. But then a mentor told me just one time, it's like, this should be done like, it shouldn't be a scramble. It should be like you're constantly trying to speak to customers, you're constantly checking dashboards, you're constantly keeping in touch with trends and everything. Like for example, now the hype is all around ChatGPT, GPT-4, it's my business to be able to understand that and figure out where the market's going. Because for that, for example, it looks like a lot of technology is going to be uprooted and replaced by this. So that could affect us. It could affect our customers. There's also the economy that is changing a lot in the last year and this year too. How will that affect these things? So all this kind of allows us to get that data that we really need to get the vision to test and to learn what makes the most sense. And that's, I mean, you know that from Scrum, things change all the time too, right? And the priorities change. It's the same thing with discovery. You learn something new constantly. Things change. So yeah.
Wonderful. So now you are touching something really close to my heart. There's a lot of continuous activities in Scrum. So I guess that product discovery is now becoming one of those. It's good to remind ourselves, it's good to remind our audience that this is not something that you do, I don't know, for instance, every quarter because you have quarterly goals, or every year because you have yearly goals. It's like planning. Proper done planning is Scrum is an activity, continuous activity happening whenever needed, happening continuously. And I feel that based what you say, the same applies for product discovery.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it, because I think a lot of it boils down to risk, the risk and whatever our assumptions are, the risk of delivery, like if there's any roadblockers, red flags, these types of things. It's the same, I think, in product as well, because when you're trying to do that discovery, there's information that you might have got at the start of the quarter or the end of the quarter that is now, it's like it's vulnerable, right? The data could be vulnerable over time within 3 months, right? You need to constantly, if you generate data in Q1, you check it only again at the end of Q2, then you're like, things might have changed. Now I have to run another test. So like I've realized now that it's just the risk is everywhere. Things are constantly changing. So you need to just constantly keep learning. Like I said, in the environment that we're in right now, it has to be continuous discovery. And that affects the delivery too. So I think there should be synchronization in both to make sure that you're getting the most value for customers and the business at any given time.
Yeah, I agree. So seems like product discovery should be a part of every sprint in Scrum because we are continuously learning and continuously managing risks.
And I think as well, to add to that, the I agree, because it's the line is starting to blur in many ways, because when I said at the start that it's really a separation of everything outside of delivery. Well, like I spent the first 9 months of my job in Typeform just running A/B tests with a team, with a full team. We didn't actually build anything. We threw out half of what we tested. So is that in delivery? Like, was there any certainty? Did I use up engineering resources in order to test those? Yeah, I kind of did. But like, we all had to work together as one continuous team to continuously discover, learn, realize that we might throw out some code, but then that really all boiled down to that one big thing we needed to create, which was that plan. And that was the thing that moved everything. So rather than it necessarily being like delivery and discovery, that they're like two separate worlds, like you're saying, you're seeing them starting to learn from each other in many ways. I'm bringing more engineers in to talk to customers from the discovery point of view, whereas a few years ago, maybe some engineers might say like, hey, I could be building something right now that's a waste of time. It's like, no, because you're the one who has all the technical knowledge and constraints, and we learn something about the customer. Who generates the ideas here, right? It shouldn't just be certain people wearing certain hats. We all should be as one continuous team and learn from each other with different methodologies. So I think that would be my philosophy on that for sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that this is the powerful statement that we can end our conversation with. So we are the one team. We are continuously working on the product, and product discovery is just one of the example of different set of practices, activities that can unite the whole team and can help everyone understand why we are called the team, no matter if we are using Scrum or any other framework.
Totally agree, 100%.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here, Dean, and I hope that people will find our conversation useful, inspirational. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.